I am Ryan McKnight.
I'm Cara Santamaria.
I am Christopher Smith.
Hi, I'm Andrew Torres.
This is Naked Mormonism,
the serial Mormon history podcast. Hello there, listeners. What you're about to listen to is a presentation on the Smith-entheogen theory that I recently gave at the John Whitmer Historical Association conference in Fairport, New York. My co-presenter, Brian Kassenbrock, presented on the Hermetic influences in the Burned Over District and the Book of Mormon, which constitutes the first roughly about 18 minutes of the presentation. After that, I take the stand and present the most recent developments in my research on psychedelics and early Mormonism. I was unable to attain permissions to video the presentation as it requires releases from all in attendance should they be seen on the video. However, John Whitmer Historical Association was kind enough to give me permission to air the audio of the presentation here on the podcast. If you're hearing this on the regular feed, you'll get the entire presentation as well as a few final remarks about how the presentation was received. However, because I was able to make the trip and conduct all of the underlying research thanks to my fantastic supporters on patreon.com/nakedmormonism, I want to do a little something extra for those supporters. If you're hearing this on the Patreon feed, it's about twice the length, and here's why. I put a lot of research and work into this presentation, and the strict time limit necessarily required a lot of culling away important information. I want all that information on the Patreon broadcast in order to further contextualize the information within the presentation itself. I want to piece together a more holistic presentation of the evidence for the Smith-entheogen theory, and my way of saying thank you for supporting the show is by aggressively expanding this broadcast to the presentation that I would have given if I had the entire hour block to give it. Quick heads up for both the Patreon and the regular feed listeners. During the Q&A portion of the presentation, the audience wasn't provided with a microphone. I've done my best to work with the audio provided, but it might be a bit tough to listen to for some of you audiophiles out there because the audio just isn't perfect. After the presentation, I'll come back in with a few additional notes as well as some of the reactions of the attendees after the presentation was given. If you're dying to hear the newest research on psychedelics and early Mormonism, like my inbox reveals, today is the day for that update. So, without further ado, here's one small aspect of the Smith-entheogen theory in its most updated form. And of course, I want to thank the John Whitmer Historical Association, especially the past president, Rachel Killebrew, as well as Jason Smith, for giving permissions and providing the audio, respectively. Let's get to it.
Welcome to session 253. My name is Vicki Speak, and I am very pleased to introduce the two people who will be presenting today. Now, the first one that we will have is, they're reversed on your program. The first one that is accidentally. So the first one that we will have is, here we go. The Influence of Hermetic Elements in the Burned Over District by Brian W. Kassenbrock. Kassenbrook? Brock. Okay. Brian taught science in New York City schools. He has been active in many civic associations and organizations. He studied at Fordham City University of New York and NYU. He studied for several years in Germany and matriculated in literature, linguistics, and medieval studies at Würzburg University. He earned his doctorate at NYU with a focus on romantic literature and its relationship to chaos and Hermeticism. He became interested in Mormon studies while visiting friends in Pocatello, Idaho, just down the road from where I'm from, and has since devoted himself to writing and presenting on matters in this field. Then our second presenter will be Bryce Blankenagel. You got a couple of German names, right? Bryce will be presenting Emma Smith's Herbcraft, evidence supporting the Smith-entheogen theory. Bryce has hosted Naked Mormonism. He does podcasts. He doesn't just host Naked Mormonism. I mean, that would really be interesting. But it's actually a podcast.
Donate pants to podcast.
There you go. He's hosted Naked Mormonism, My Book of Mormon, and Glassbox podcasts. He's presented or published on The Life of Frederick G. Williams, this is another one, not the same one. Mormon Satan, Brother of Jesus. Another one is By His Own Hand, the best worst Mormon scripture. Also, Sidney Rigdon, Forgotten Hero of Mormonism. Revelation Through Hallucination, a treatise on the Smith-entheogen theory. And then several more. He has been an invited guest speaker on cognitive dissonance, scathing atheist, opening arguments, reason revolution, the non sequitur, show, and many other podcasts. He's attended Sunstone, Reason Con, My Information, and QED in Manchester, England. And right now we will have Brian. Thank you.
Thank you for that gracious introduction. I would like to thank the John Whitmer Historical Association for this opportunity to present my ideas and share them with you. I have developed this presentation from an article I published about 2 years ago in the Whitmer Journal, the first book of Nephi and the Hermetic Discourse, as well as some of my presentations to the Sunstone Foundation. In the following minutes, I will discuss the Hermetic climate of the burned-over district and go on to illustrate 3 selected areas of Hermetic influences in the Book of Mormon. Hermes Trismegistos, Hermes thrice great, that was Greek for thrice great, was an ancient Egyptian priest about whom we have little historic information. He is considered to have lived in the 3rd century before the Christian era. We have a body of literature which is attributed to him, in which the occult, alchemy, the mystical, and magic develop a vision of an integrally interwoven universe. The positions of the stars in the heavens, the constellations, and the movements of the planets among these star constellations were considered portentous in human affairs. The nature is hidden, and the address of a physical phenomena without addressing the underlying spiritual issues is unthinkable. The Hermeticist maintains a balance between the dual components of the universe, which are often represented by light and darkness. Many of its components have come into the modern age as astronomy, chemistry, and other disciplines. Some even suggest that the internet is a Hermetic phenomenon, reflecting their belief in the interconnectedness of all things. Hermes Hermetic thought originated in ancient Egypt and spread from there throughout the Roman Empire. Islamic knowledge of Hermetics and alchemy reached Europe in the 12th century. European migrants to the Americas brought their Hermetic traditions with them. A robust interest in Hermetics flourished in 18th century New England, where, of course, the Smith family came from, and was even prominent among scholars at Yale and Harvard universities. However, occult knowledge had a populist quality, since people could derive solutions for themselves based on their books and their potions and so on, without recourse to the political and social hierarchies of the day. Masonic and Rosicrucian practices had Hermetic elements and were influential in the district. Hermetics, visions, and the occult ran contrary to the theology of the day, which elevated a rational view of Christianity. Passages of the Book of Mormon such as when Lehi finds a magic brass ball outside of his tent, read like portions out of a fantasy novel. It was no coincidence that Alexander Campbell, about whom, by the way, there's a very fine book out in the exhibits here at this meeting, that Alexander Campbell, the product of the Scotch Enlightenment, was Joseph's sharpest critic. When Joseph confided to a prominent Methodist minister of his day about his visions, the minister scolded him severely, saying, "Those kinds of things don't happen anymore." However much Hermetics and alchemy were of tremendous fascination to the people of that time, Mormonism has gone through a process 200 years long, which has been called by Max Weber disenchantment or demagification. Most modern Mormons have moved so far away from the occult that they do not even recognize the rich embroidery of symbolism, hermetic and otherwise, which weaves itself through the works of the prophet. The young Joseph was in many ways the village conjurer who applied his divining rod and his seer stones to find lost objects and even buried treasure. These skills followed him when his thoughts turned to religion. He dug up the golden plates from the hill of Cumorah using similar methods as would have been used to find buried treasure. The time and date were at midnight on the vernal autumnal equinox, when the forces of night and day were in perfect balance. That's a Hermetic ideal of the balancing of these forces. As he translated the Book of Mormon, the plates lie covered mostly with linen cloth, while Joseph buried his head in his hat, looking into his seer stones. He was in the process of discovering the meaning of his buried treasure. What had begun as a quest for gold and silver had become a quest for spiritual meaning and revelation. I'll now go to, bear with me one moment, there we go. Section 2, the first book of Nephi's Hermetic structure. A few of the many Hermetic elements in this first book of the Book of Mormon are structural. I will develop how the original chapter structure reflects the seven rulers of the heavens and how the Hermetic theme of the unity of the heavens and the earth recapitulate themselves in this book. In the original 1830 version of 1 Nephi, there were 7 chapters. In 1908, Orson Pratt divided the work into enumerated chapters and verses, and this version is the one familiar to most readers today. Although this did not change the text of the book, the reorganization did change how the work is perceived by the reader. A thematic analysis of these original chapters reveals that they correspond to the 7 rulers of the heavens: the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The luminous and fiery episodes of the first chapter, as seen in Lehi's vision of a pillar of fire and then of a celestial realm, invoke the sun. That's the first chapter in the 1840 first book of Nephi. The second chapter, with its visions, its dreams, its nocturnal quality, invoke the moon. In chapter 3, Nephi's vision upon a high hill reveal a staccato of events and invokes Mercury's speedy transit across the sky. The fourth chapter's emphasis on bonding evokes the Venetian ideal and theme of love. The grumbling and strife of the 5th chapter evoke Mars, the god of war. Nephi ascends to prominence in chapter 6 and becomes a Jovian figure, the moderator of things. Finally, chapter 7 is devoted to sermons, and it is the Saturday chapter, one of reflection and rest and meditation. Hermes Trismegistos is said to have been buried between 2 twin pillars and the emerald tablet in the Great Pyramid of Cheops in ancient Egypt. These represent the Hermetic ideal of the powers of the earth reaching up to the heavens and the powers of the heavens streaming down to the earth. The emerald tablet says, that which is above is like that which is below, and that which is below is like that which is above, to accomplish the miracle of one thing. 1 Nephi reflects this duality. Early in the book, Nephi reveals that he makes a record of the learning of the Jews in the language of the Egyptians. This harkens back to Joseph's sojourn to Egypt, where he became now the Egyptians are going to Europe, but that's another matter. Sojourn to Egypt, where he became so Egyptianized that upon his demise, his body was mummified, called embalmed in most modern translations, but it was mummification at that time. Clearly, Joseph's descendants went forth with an Egyptian cultural heritage and a Hebrew religious identity and ethic. Nephi has twin visions which reflect this duality. As mentioned earlier, he sees a pillar of fire upon a rock, is overcome, and goes home. Then he has a vision in which he is carried up to heaven and sees God upon his throne surrounded by angels. When Nephi is sent back to Jerusalem to retrieve Laban's plates, he slays Laban, dons his clothes, and assumes Laban's identity. 2 identities within one person. Finally, there are twin scriptures within Lehi's experience. First, there is the book, which an angel gives to him in the vision up in the heavens, and then there are the brass plates, which are in fact very important to be retrieved as the journey goes on to the new world. In section 3, is now Jesus' Hermetic appearance or apparition in 3 Nephi. Jesus' appearance in 3 Nephi is arguably the centerpiece of the work. Its powerful imagery puts flesh on what was hitherto skeletal descriptions of Jesus. In the next few minutes, I will show how his appearance reflects many Hermetic themes, such as the symbolism of light and darkness, the unity of the heavens and the earth, the unity of nature, the harmonic balance of dual forces in the universe, and the miracle of cosmic unity. At first, a voice announces his coming, and at that night darkness does not fall. Later, a vapor of darkness descends upon the land, where there is not only no sun, nor moon, nor stars, but no flame may be kindled, and in the pre-electrical age, this meant total darkness. After 3 days, light dawns, and there's an equivalent period of light without darkness. The people hear a voice and see a man clothed in white descending from heaven. The mission of the Hermetic Savior is to bring these into balance, and in his visit, he restores harmony to a world rent by dissension. The Book of Mormon alludes to Christ's crucifixion obliquely. In 3 Nephi, the coming of Christ is foretold by a new sign. The sun goes down, but darkness does not descend, and a new star appears. The Nephites begin to count their years from this event. They go the 30 years of Christ's life, and then come to his crucifixion, at which time a terrible storm rocks the whole area of North America. The earth is divided asunder, lands are thrown up and down, buildings collapse, roads are spoiled, and many perish. These events last about 3 hours, traditionally the time frame in which it is attributed that Christ hung on the cross. This time frame corresponds perfectly to the crucifixion, and the time frame of the occurrence of all of this in the after is a Passover is the first month of the Hebrew year, that is March and April. It would be perfect timing for the Passover at that time and the crucifixion. When Christ dies on the cross. The veil of the temple is rent, the earth quakes, and many of the dead are raised from their graves. When Christ suffers on Calvary, his sufferings are earth-shaking events in North America, half a world away. His passion is not a local event, but a cosmic happening in which all of heaven and nature participate. That which is done on earth was reflected by that which is done in heaven, and that which was done in heaven is now reflected by that which is done on earth. His suffering and death accomplish the miracle of the one thing, perfect unity. Section 4, the Philosopher's Stone and the Elixir of Life. Alchemy is the ancient art of transforming a base substance into a noble one. It is accomplished by forging and refining and by prayers and incantations. Beyond that, however, it is accomplished by the spiritual transformation of wicked and imperfect beings into holy and perfect ones. Alchemy involves both the quest for the Philosopher's Stone and the Elixir of Life. The Philosopher's Stone is alluded to in the following passages in the third book of Nephi. O thou afflicted, tossed with tempest and not confronted, behold, I will lay the stones with fair colors, and lay thy foundations with sapphires, and I will make with thy windows of agates, and thy gates of carbuncles, and all of thy borders of pleasant stones. In the above quote, the many variations of color reflect the phrases through which the alchemist would observe the stone changing as it was forged. Homyard describes it thus: the revived body, transubstantiated corpus, is of the most beautiful purple color. Its tincture has virtue to change, tinge, and cure every imperfect body. Carbuncles are a detail of particular interest. Reflecting Hermetic duality, carbuncles are set on the gates and are in contrast to the Philosopher's Stone. As I developed in the above-mentioned article, Joseph was deeply immersed in German literature and culture. One of his closest associates, John Whitmer, was a German. His family was German. They were steeped in German culture. They had a German community, and they were very close with Joseph Smith. Hours spent at their table listening to their German folk tales and fairy tales and so on and so forth. We know Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and so on and so forth. Now, the point is that in these tales there is a blood-red gem, in German Karfunkel, but in English carbuncle, and it has the power to make the bearer invisible, so you cannot be seen. In German, unsichtbar zu machen. So, thus protected, one will be safe from all enemies. And the Book of Mormon goes on to say, and quote, all thy children shall be taught of the Lord, and great shall be the peace of thy children. Thou shalt be far from oppression, and thou shalt not fear, and from terror, for it shall not come near thee. Behold, they shall surely gather together against thee, not by me. Whoever shall gather together against thee shall fail and fall for thy sake. He goes on to refer to the smith and the forge. Behold, I have created the smith and the forge, that coals in the fire, that bringeth forth an instrument of his work. And I have created the waster to destroy. No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment shall thou condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of their Lord, the Lord, and the righteousness is of me, saith the Lord. M.A. Atwood, in her Hermetic Philosophy and Alchemy, writes that one of the recurring themes in Hermetics is the elixir of life, or the substance which could convey great length of days. To quote, Artephius was a Jew who, by the use of the elixir, is reported to have lived for a period of 1,000 years. In addition to the extraordinary length of that life term, it is interesting to note the number of 1,000. This is a millennial figure. There is a millennial significance to this conveyance of additional life. The Philosopher's Stone, also known as the elixir of life, possesses the ability to transform the mortal into the immortal, and may be granted by an alchemical savior. In 2 Nephi, Nephi speaks about opposition between the forbidden fruit and the tree of life. Here, again, Hermetic duality emerges. Quote, "It must needs be that there was an opposition. Even the forbidden fruit is opposition to the tree of life, the one being sweet and the other being bitter. In spite of the exceedingly desirous quality of the fruit, its taste is bitter, and its attraction lies not in that it is delicious, but rather in the fact that it has mind-altering qualities." The crowds pressed on to own the fruit, and when they taste it, they become ashamed. A great and spacious building arises, and from it, finely dressed company mock those pilgrims partaking of the fruit. Many abandon their journey towards the fruit and divert themselves towards the building. Many drown. Those who reach the building join in heaping scorn on those who are seeking the fruit. Lehi has found the elixir of life. To those who partake, it offers happiness and length of days. Many choose another path, one dominated by material comforts, signified by the great and spacious building, but the great and spacious building, as we all know, eventually falls. As mentioned earlier, there is a populist element to Hermetics, and this resonated very strongly with the early Mormon community and its worldview. Here it is made clear that all the best things in life are available to all those who seek, regardless of their state of life and social structure. Thank you.
All right. Last presentation of the day. I don't know about you. I need a little waking up. Shake our hands. Come on, let's do it. Shake our hands. All right. A little tap on the cheeks. Shake it out. All right. All right. I want everybody to respond to good to my next few questions. All right. How's everybody's John Whitmer going so far? Good. Good. Hey, I said good. Okay. How's the weather outside today?
Good.
How's everybody doing today?
Good.
All right, how is this presentation going to go? Okay, I can tell people in Mormon studies don't always do as they're told. So first off, I want to thank you, Brian, for this chaotic introduction to the Burned Over District and to the Book of Mormon. I also want to thank the John Whitmer Historical Association for allowing me to present on my personal research. This is my first time presenting here at John Whitmer, and I've chosen a relatively controversial subject to present, so please bear with me. By way of introduction, at Sunstone in 2017, my co-researcher, Cody Nakoni, and I presented what we termed the Smith-entheogen theory. We built on Robert Becksted's 2007 paper, Restoration and the Sacred Mushroom, and we took the blueprints established by Dr. Becksted and essentially constructed what we consider to be a viable historical model that psychedelics were present in early Mormonism. Today I'll be presenting the cultural milieu in which entheogens were used in early American medical and occult traditions, and I hope to get your feedback in order to hone this historical model and publish it in a forthcoming edition of the John Whitmer Journal. So, also, if there are any physicians or anesthesiologists in the crowd, I don't see Brian Hales here, I'd love to have a conversation with you about this topic. So, my co-presenter, Brian, left us off at a really interesting place, the elixir of life. The philosopher's stone, the prima materia, one of the greatest mysteries in all of chaotic and magic and hermetic and alchemical traditions. And various interpretations of the philosopher's stone have made their way into our cultural milieu even today, but it first appeared around 300 CE in print in Chirokmita by Zosimos of Panopolis. What the Philosopher's Stone actually is has been a source of debate ever since. Is it a substance that turns mercury or lead into gold? Is it merely an ethereal concept with ineffable attributes that can only be described through symbolism? Is it simply the embodiment of perfection and the endless pursuit thereof? I believe the elixir of life, the philosopher's stone, provides the user with limitless perspective and power, psychedelics, or as we'll call them, entheogens. Here's a brief introduction for my presentation, an outline for what you can expect today. We're going to discuss what entheogens are. Then we'll briefly get into the history of entheogen use in herbal remedies. After that, we'll discuss the important and often overlooked aspect of entheogens in occult practices. With that context established, we're going to discuss two pieces of evidence that entheogens were likely used in early visionary Mormonism. Those pieces of evidence come in the form of one of Joseph Smith Sr.'s dreams, reported by Lucy Mack Smith, and the other comes in the form of a letter sent by Emma Hale Smith Bideman to her son, Joseph III, in 1867, which includes an explicit datura recipe. Then we'll wrap with a conclusion. So, let's begin by getting our terminology straight. Entheogen is a combination of entheos, inspired or possessed by God, and genesthai, to come into being. Psychedelics is essentially the colloquial term that we use for recreational use, while entheogen refers to using plant medicine for ritualistic purposes. Using entheogens in a proper set and setting has a high likelihood of inspiring theophany in the mind of the user. Theophany, of course, meaning a deeply profound spiritual experience. Now, an important detail here, and one of the central points of the Smith-entheogen thesis, is the need for and the utility of a shaman, a guide. A shaman is a guide to help those who partake to have an experience that the shaman directs. Shamans create a conducive set and setting for theophany, which is usually some form of ritualism. People under the influence of many psychedelic plants are very suggestible, and they're often not really tethered to reality. So their mind can go to all sorts of dark places during an entheogenic experience. So a practiced shaman is a person who can help the people see and experience the session in a positive or ritualistic or religious way. And here's a point that is quite notable. Not all shamans are alike. Under the influence of entheogens, people can be persuaded to see, to experience, and to do many things that they otherwise might not. For the hours that a person is under the influence, a shaman holds that person's sanity and often their life in their hands. I believe that Joseph Smith was a shaman, particularly in the Kirtland era of early Mormonism. So what are these plants? What are entheogens? When taken, these plants create in the mind of the user what we call non-ordinary reality, or altered states of consciousness, and that's from the mindset of the person that is using the substance. Now, the experiences completely defy description. They are quite mysterious. Many people will perceive a version of reality that simply isn't there. Sometimes like sitting around a fire with long dead friends and relatives, or running through the forest from scary monsters, when really they are just sitting around alone in their backyard, or they're running naked down the street. Now, we can understand descriptions of these altered states of consciousness, these non-ordinary realities, with today's terminology, using phrases like people seeing the face of God, or people feeling unending love and beauty, or people seeing fractals. That's modern terminology. But when we're looking back into the 19th century, we need to understand the terms that they used, like deleterious, or intoxication, or giddiness, or these plants pervert all the rational faculties. They cause madness. They have narcotic properties. In the medical sense, and of course in the occult sense, we have things like celestial gifts, divine inspiration, enchantments, and sorceries. A specific group of entheogens that is going to be our focus today, and that is the nightshade family. These were known as the hexing herbs or the witching ointments employed in the occult context. The Solanaceae family we know today as nightshades is comprised of over 2,500 plants. Staple crops like potatoes and even tomatoes, those are members of the nightshade family. But we're going to focus on the nightshades most known for being distilled into oils or into topical ointments, or infused into alcohol to make psychoactive tinctures. These hexing herbs are hellebore, mandrake, belladonna, henbane, and datura. Datura specifically will be the entheogen we focus and discuss near the end when we get to our two pieces of evidence for entheogens in the Smith family and early Mormonism. Jacob Bigelow wrote a Materia Medica in 1822, which was essentially his proprietary version of an herbal remedy book. Materia Medica was obviously materials you use for medicine, right? This was published in Boston of 1822, where he described datura. And he also reports common names, datura stramonium, which stramonium is just a strain, but it also is used colloquially. Thorn apple is a common term for it. Jimson or Jamestown weed was a common name. Devil's weed is also datura. And then from the Arabic name, tatora, and then from the German, Der Stechapfel.
Der Stechapfel.
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 Stechapfel. I don't know German. Thank you. See, we need people who speak German to help us get through this. So this is how Jacob Bigelow describes datura in his 1822 Boston Materia Medica. Quote, datura is a powerful narcotic. It produces nausea and dizziness. But if the quantity be large, it brings on great prostration of strength, loss of muscular power, insensibility of the retina, occasioning dilated pupil, tremors, headache, delirium, sometimes convulsions, coma, and death. It sounds like a modern, antidepressant commercial or something, right? He also says, if not fatal, the effects wear off in a day or two, creating phenomena like those of intoxication, end quote. All of these listed symptoms are common effects of anticholinergic drugs. Anticholinergic being the neurochemical process which causes these symptoms that Jacob Bigelow described. Datura is extensively discussed in many of these herbal remedy books, and occult books alluded to or explicitly dealt with datura and other members of the nightshade family, sometimes using coded language to do so. So let's begin with talking about the medical side of these herbal remedies. Medical books became very popular during the Enlightenment period. Notably, John Wesley, one of the co-founders of Methodism, published his first edition of Primitive Physic in the 1740s when Methodism was gaining traction all over Europe and the early American colonies. Now, this book, Primitive Physic, was widely circulated with over 20 editions that I could find into the late 1700s. So it wasn't uncommon for practicing Methodists to have a copy of this herbal remedy book, Primitive Physic, next to their Bible on their bookcase. We also have Medicina Britannica, written by Thomas Short from the same decade, 1746, and it includes hundreds of herbs, their description, their uses, their psychoactive effects, and even picture plates in order to help identify the plants in the wild for when you're foraging out in the forest. And of course, he talks about henbane. Quote, henbane is a great narcotic, but it disturbs and perverts all the rational faculties and causes madness. If taken in too great a quantity, it causes certain death, end quote. He also included descriptions of mandrake, hellebore, other members of the nightshade family, as well as hemp, or cannabis. We also have The History of Drugs by Pierre Pomé, published in 1748. These herbal books, these are three books from the same decade. They were all over the place and really gained traction in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Let's talk about Thomsonian medicine. Thomsonian medicine became wildly popular throughout the mid to late 1820s and into the 1830s. Early Mormonism had many Thomsonian herbal physicians, including counselor in the First Presidency, Frederick G. Williams. I personally found 10 editions of Samuel Thompson's work that date through the late 1820s and all the way into the late 1830s, and there are likely more editions that I couldn't find just in searching. But Thompson also decried the mainstream medical practice like bleeding and the use of mercury. Thompson's books were best when they were coupled with Materia Medica books like Jacob Bigelow's 1822 Materia Medica, from which I described the anticholinergic symptoms of henbane previously in the 2 slides ago. So essentially what happened is Thomsonian vegetable medicine provided the directions of how to use remedies, and then Materia Medica books provided the recipes and where to find the plants. Notably, in Jacob Bigelow's 1822 Boston Materia Medica, he discusses the fatal effects of belladonna, a member of the nightshade family. And this is notable. bear with me. Quote, "The whole of the plant is poisonous, producing in large doses intoxication attendant with thirst." We call that cottonmouth today. Nausea, insensibility of the retina, causing dilated pupil and other dangerous symptoms of narcotics. So these same anticholinergic effects of the nightshade family. But notably, he says, quote, "In fatal cases, the stomach and bowels are found inflamed and gangrenous, and the whole body becomes swollen and highly putrescent," end quote. Published in 1822. I would postulate that nightshade ingestion in pursuit of the hidden mysteries may have caused the death of Alvin Smith in 1823, a previously unexplored cause. The point is, people were abundantly familiar with the deleterious effects of these various herbs, and those who weren't familiar took too much and died. An entire body of folk remedy knowledge passed through families to teach children what to stay away from, or what mom needs to fix little Susie's cough, or what tastes good when it's mixed into stew. Thomsonian medicine and the rise of popular herbal remedy books tried to codify these folk remedies into a central actual handbook that could be attained with just a few shillings. One of the greatest uses of Thomson's herbal books is his directories at the end of it. In kind of like an index, he gives the scientific name for each plant, where to find it in the book, and then notably the colloquial names to which they may be referred. So when a person said that you need to pick some Noah's Ark or some moccasin flower, they are actually referring to Cypridium, that's in Thomson's book. When they say King's Cure is what you need to get rid of those piles, they actually mean you're looking for Pyrella umbellia. So psychedelics, at this time, used entheogenically and herbal remedies, these were sacred knowledge to many. Herbal remedies kept families alive. They also provided entheogenic intoxication, which could be used for many ritualistic and occult purposes. Users of these plants often coded their language, with none daring to blaspheme perfection by explicitly calling them the philosopher's stone or the prima materia. So, if I say the term witch's potion, what comes to mind? What do you think of? Is this what we see? The magic crystal ball, the pointy hat, a wart on the nose, a big cauldron that's steaming. We think of things like eye of newt and cow's tongue and salamander gizzard. It's laughable, but the point here is that practitioners of occult herbal medicine, they weren't actually scavenging the forest and plucking out the eyes of newts. Those were code names that only initiates could use to use and identify the correct plants and herbs. Entheogens were sacred medicines to connect people with the divine, a way for the user to connect with what they perceived as the divine. Herbal remedies that we often write off, oh, that's just folk remedies, whatever. It was a rich tradition with a deep and vast knowledge base, including barriers of entry to the most guarded secrets of entheogenic uses. Knowing what plants are medicinal, what plants are good with foods, what plants will kill you, and what plants can be used entheogenically was a massive skill set that shouldn't be disregarded or casually thrown away by calling it folk remedies. This skill set often included insider knowledge transferred through code names and cryptic language. So let's talk about entheogens in occult traditions. Here on the picture plates, we have Henry Cornelius Agrippa from the 15th and 16th centuries. We have Francis Barrett, who just plagiarized from these guys. And then we have Ebenezer Sibley. Each of these occult philosophers wrote their treatises on occultism, all of which included extensive sections on herbalism and commentary on the uses and the dangers of psychedelic drugs or entheogens. The extent to which people were steeped in occultism, they were often steeped in the use of plants and herbs, including entheogens. Historians Lance Owens, D. Michael Quinn, Dan Vogel, and many others have, aptly demonstrated the occult influence of the Smith family and many 19th century Americans and early Mormons. Unfortunately, the psychedelic aspect of occult magicians remains overlooked by the current body of Mormon historians. And I cannot stress this point enough. If we grant the magic worldview of Joseph Smith and the early Mormons, we must seriously consider entheogen and psychedelic use as well. From Ebenezer Sibley in his 1790 Herbal Physician that he wrote with a guy named Nicholas Culpeper, this was published in England. It included, the title of it is, quote, the display of their medicinal and occult properties of these herbs. Now that's notable, their medicinal and their occult properties. And what the occult properties is referring to is the ruling planets of these vegetables. These plants and herbs. So the ruling planets of Venus and Jupiter and Saturn that ruled over these various herbs coincided with the vegetative, flowering, and harvesting phases of all of these plants. So herbal occult books could be used in conjunction with almanacs to know when and where to find various plants and herbs and know when they would be in an expected life cycle. Francis Barrett's The Magus, from page 29, quote, "The juice of deadly nightshade makes the party imagine almost whatever you choose," end quote. Really pointing out that Francis Barrett was familiar with the necessity of a shaman that can choose what the person sees who is using this deadly nightshade. And then, of course, Henry Cornelius Agrippa, he wrote the 3-book Occult Philosophy. And on chapter 24, page 100 of this 3-book Occult Philosophy, it includes the plants that are ruled by the planet Jupiter, which is Joseph Smith's ruling planet, one of which is henbane, one of the nightshade family. Now, there's a passage that I want to read and tease out from Agrippa's book. And it's kind of a long passage, so please bear with me, but there are truly incredible pieces in here that we need to understand within the context of this passage. The chapter is titled Of Perfumes or Suffumigations, Their Manner and Power. Suffumigation, of course, means to smoke or to vaporize various plants, whether that's smoking it directly through a pipe or whether that's putting the oil and oil extract on a metal plate and heating the metal plate and inhaling the vapors. That's the act of suffumigation. Quote, "Some suffumigations that are proper to the stars, their ruling planets, are of great force for the opportune receiving of celestial gifts under the rays of the stars." Celestial gifts, given, endowed by suffumigating these specific herbs. Suffumigations are wont to be used by them that are about to soothsay or predict for to affect their fancy or conception, which suffumigations, indeed, being duly appropriated to any certain deities, do fit us to receive divine inspiration. That is explicitly saying that people in the occult tradition, in this 3-book handbook of occult philosophy, would suffumigate or smoke these herbs to get in the state of mind to soothsay or to predict or to receive the celestial gifts that are endowed by the ruling planets of the herbs that are embodied in these plants. And divine inspiration, obviously, that has a rich terminology within the Restorationist theology. He continues, "So they say that fumes doth make one to foresee things to come and doth conduce to prophesying." People who are about to prophesy suffumigate specific herbs, and that puts them in the state of mind that they can commit, or that they can prophesy. Continuing, by certain vapors, airy spirits are presently raised. We might call that conjuring, as also thunderings and lightnings and such. Auditory hallucinations, aiding in the conjuration of spirits. So they say that if henbane and hemlock, which whoever's responsible for putting this presentation in the hemlock room, I owe them a hug or a kiss, whichever they will appreciate and not file sexual harassment claims on me. I shouldn't have said that. Okay, so anyway, so they say that if henbane and hemlock be made to fume, that spirits will presently come together, hence they are called spirits' herbs. It was believed that the spirits lived inside these herbs, and you smoked these herbs in order to conjure the spirits that lived inside of them. Finally, the juice of hemlock and henbane makes spirits and strange shapes appear. Hallucinations. He also speaks of these herbs inducing hypnotic trances where the victim perceives themselves as being an animal, or that they fall in love like an aphrodisiac, or they perceive literal changes of solid objects into living things. It's truly remarkable. He also relates a story of a woman who would basically drug cheese and give it to travelers and put them under a hypnotic trance, and then just have them do work around the farm. And also specifically says that these various spirits, herbs, were likely present in the Bible when he says, quote, "The scriptures themselves testify that Pharaoh's sorcerers turned their rods into serpents and water into blood and did other such like things." All in this same chapter about suffumigations. I believe that's quite notable in this passage, and the entire chapter, the chunks that I cut out, just further contextualize all of this information. I find it truly remarkable, and once again, seemingly overlooked. So then a question remains, what do these entheogens accomplish? How are they experienced by the user? Some people describe them as having healing properties. Many people will see images of people or angels or demons, or they'll use them to conjure spirits, or they'll see faces where in rocks or in tree bark or in walls where there aren't actually faces. Maybe they'll see gold buried underground or cities through mountains, when none of those things actually exist in ordinary reality. Instead, they only exist in the non-ordinary reality of the user. Most importantly, entheogens incite spiritual theophany when taken in a conducive set and setting, often directed by a shaman like Joseph Smith. So, let's hone in on Datura. I know everything so far, that was a long overview, but that just served to contextualize the two pieces of evidence that I'm proposing today, that psychedelics were present and likely influenced early Mormonism. I believe that Lucy Mack Smith utilized the faculty of a brack by leaving breadcrumbs for adept readers in the form of one of Joseph Sr.'s dreams. One of these 5 reported dreams, similar to Lehi's in the Book of Mormon, provides an extensive description of a plant which almost perfectly matches a datura plant. This plant is prominently the central focus of the dream, and I can't think of a logical reason that Lucy Mack Smith would have reported Joseph Sr.'s dream 35 years after it happened with such explicit detail, unless she was passing her selected prima materia to generations later who would read it with spiritual eyes. Quote, "I was traveling in an open and desolate field which appeared to be very barren. Beyond me was a low but very pleasant valley in which stood a tree such as I had never seen before." This is when the tree becomes a central focus of the vision. And it's not called a dream, it's a vision. Vision quest, maybe? "It was exceedingly handsome, insomuch that I looked upon it with wonder and admiration. Its beautiful branches spread themselves somewhat like an umbrella, and it bore a kind of fruit in the shape much like a chestnut burr. And it bore, and to back up here, this illustration in the center of the slide here, there's a small hard green seed pod just below the most prominent trumpet, the angel's trumpet that you see there. That's the seed pod of a datura plant when it is not ripe. As it ripens, that seed pod turns white and it expands out, and then the seeds shoot out of the front of it in order to propagate the plant. Joseph Sr., Lucy Mack Smith continues reporting on Joseph Smith Sr.'s vision. Quote, "It bore a shape much like the chestnut burr, and as white as snow, or if possible, whiter. I gazed upon the same with considerable interest, and as I was doing so, the burrs or shells commenced opening and shedding the particles or the fruit which they contained, which was of dazzling whiteness. I drew near and began to eat of it." Joseph Smith Sr., the tree itself is a central focus, and he walks up and he eats the seeds, which, notably, the seeds are the most psychoactive part of the datura plant. Quote, "And I found it delicious beyond description. I presently turned to my guide," maybe his shaman, "and inquired of him the meaning of the fruit that was so delicious. He told me it was the pure love of God shed abroad in the hearts of all those who love him and keep his commandments." End quote. The pure love of God is terminology that many people today use to describe their psychedelic and entheogenic experiences. Lucy Mack Smith reporting this vision the way that she did was perfectly in line with occult traditions of using coded and cryptic language and stories to pass her prima materia to the next generations. I believe Lucy made order from the chaos of the Philosopher's Stone by infusing entheogens into Joseph Sr.'s dreams. Now to the second piece of evidence. Emma Hill Smith Biderman wrote a letter to her son 7 years into his presidency of the RLDS tradition. This letter is a recipe for a healing salve, which includes datura, referred to as Jimson by Emma. Quote, "Now, Joseph, pardon me for forgetting to send you the directions for making that salve before this. I will tell you now how to make the salve of sweet elder bark, a good large handful after it is scraped, and as much Jimson leaves and buds if they are green and tender enough to be pounded up fine. Strain the liquor through the cloth." This is a spirituous liquor. The spirit that lived in the herb was infused into the liquor to make it a spirituous liquor. "If you have not the Jimson and elder, let me know and I will send you the salve ready-made." End quote. This is Emma's healing salve recipe that includes datura in 1867. She refers to earlier in the letter that when she made it when she was, I assume, a young child, that she didn't have some of the active ingredients and that it was also thought to be a fantastic healing salve. But I would also postulate that datura is quite a powerful active ingredient to include in this. And of course, she kept a quantity on hand at all times, just in case Joseph needed a little bit. So, conclusion. Psychedelics as entheogens were used in 19th century occult traditions. If we grant the Smith magical worldview and the members of the Smith family being steeped in occult traditions, entheogen use is an aspect of occultism that should not remain overlooked. Second, practitioners of the occult often coded their language and left behind breadcrumbs for readers who read with initiated or with a spiritual eye. And third, historians don't have access to the divine. We simply cannot demonstrate that God did this or that as a working part of a historical model. For that reason, naturalistic explanations are required for the visionary era of early Mormonism. I believe the Smith-entheogen theory provides that crucial piece of explanatory power. I believe that Joseph Smith knew not only what the prima materia was, but how to use it to connect himself and his followers with what they perceived as deity. I believe Joseph Smith was a shaman. And of course, 23 minutes is an absurdly short amount of time to present this obviously massive topic. But I discussed the Smith-entheogen theory extensively on my podcast, Naked Mormonism, about the history of the church. And I would direct anybody seeking a further treatise and treatment of the evidence to that podcast feed. And of course, I want to thank everybody for coming to my first John Whitmer presentation. And if there isn't enough time in the Q&A to discuss any of your questions, I'd love to talk to you after today's presentation. Thank you.
We now have time for some questions. Come on up here. All right. Does anybody have questions? What a great session. Very, very
It was a great session. I came 10,000 miles, and this session, I got to tell you, it wasn't far enough to come for this.
Thank you.
I mean,
it means a lot.
honestly, it was so nice to hear someone else read the Book of Mormon the way that I know that I have tried to do it, that there is very much about that book that has yet to be kind of understood from a literary and technical point of view. So that was wonderful. But what I want to say about what you're doing, which I think is absolutely revolutionary and brilliant. Please let it find its way into the John Whitmer Historical Association Journal.
Certainly.
The podcast is great, but get it published, and I think you will serve the whole question of early Mormonism and all that in a way that no one has really done for quite a long time. Not really since I would say Quinn, and some others, where we have something that really bends our head the way your stuff does. But Alvin's death as a consequence of an overdose. When we talked about it before, but when I listened to what you talk about this time, it occurred to me that wait a minute. In the story, don't they say that Alvin dies and then they open him up and they discover that he had been essentially poisoned by mercury or something?
That they found the mercury was backed up, but his bowels were gangrenous and inflamed.
So I wondered, I thought, could it be, and because there have been several sessions in which, the idea of Alvin's death and the first vision and all that seems to be, extremely important. Could it be that, the Thompson's medical stuff, which was kind of a esoteric version of Christian Science or something, right? Could it be that Alvin's death from traditional medicine causes the Smiths to go the way of herbal remedy?
They certainly learned that they didn't like traditional doctors with not only with Alvin Smith's death, but also with Joseph Smith's leg surgery. And I think that scared them away from the institution.
We know what killed Alvin. I think Alvin died because he was a victim of the traditional medicine at the time, and then the Smiths took on this medicine position and the occult and all that. This is kind of what really came across, even though that was not what you meant to say.
To comment on your point, the rise of Thomsonian medicine was a meter stick of the anti-bleeding and anti-mercury and the large institution of medical science at the time. Herbal and Thomsonian medicine basically was just a system. In many ways, Thomsonian medicine was an MLM of herbal remedies because he sold his books brand new, every one of them with a physician's certificate that the purchaser of the book would just fill out their name. If you wanted to become a Thomsonian herbal physician, many people had the knowledge or had some extent of the knowledge, and they just needed a handbook that they could refer to whenever they needed to. And it should be noted that in the late 1820s, Thompson also came under some legal troubles. I don't know the detail of it, but somebody who was trying to slander his character, according to him, took high doses of his favorite herb, Lobelia inflata, Indian tobacco, in order to prove that it was deleterious and essentially that Thompson was just a drug addict, which he contended with beginning in his 1831 edition of the Family Vegetable Medicine.
Any other questions?
Have you ever made any of the herbal tinctures and stuff and gathered them? I know, like plantain. I know people who teach classes about how to do this. So eat your Wheaties. So I just didn't know if you'd ever made some of these salves yourselves.
Maybe wants to plead the fifth.
Well, I'll be honest. The Emma Healing Salve letter was something that only recently came into my knowledge and possession. So that unfortunately came into our possession long past the expected harvesting stage of Datura, and we have to wait until next year's harvest to give it a shot. But that's not saying, and I don't want anything in this presentation to be construed that I am recommending psychedelic or entheogen use. I think I am a propagator of information, and everybody should research it for themselves. And don't do anything illegal, folks.
And he's not a physician.
I'm not a physician, exactly.
Okay. Yes.
So, did Joseph Smith, I'm just thinking of Kirtland and the visions and with the temple, was it distributed among the members to cause them to have visionary experience as well? And if so, how was that distributed to them?
So there are a couple of possibilities for that. The least likely, in my opinion, is the bread itself. The bread could have been ergotized, which ergot is the foundational chemical for lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD. LSD is taken from ergot. You can bake bread with ergotized rye or wheat, and it causes the bread itself to be psychedelic or entheogenic, depending on your use of it.
Just a recall on flour because it had
ergot. Yeah, smut. Yeah, they call it smut. In the 1820s, there was an inventor who created an invention that could pull the smut off of the rye. It was quite notable. That was in Boston that he made that discovery. But like I said, that's the least likely. The most likely is the wine. Because if you're going to drug a whole lot of people in mass, and you're already administering sacrament to them, and sacrament it's one of the earliest practices of the church that survives to this day. Most of the things we do in church today evolved in the later Kirtland or in the Nauvoo era. Sacrament was one of the earliest things that they instituted and started doing. The wine itself, you can take an eyedropper or a small vial amount of these things, drop it in the wine barrels that they were drinking, barrels of wine at the dedication ceremony, and nobody would be any the wiser.
Bryce, if I could just briefly add, rye rot or fungus is considered to have been a factor in the Salem witch hunts. The young girls, they believe, were hallucinating, who testified and created this panic, this frenzy. Also, anointing with oils. Many of these substances are very soluble in oil, so when they anointed with oils, that is believed also to.
Right, which is the hexing herbs or the witching ointments. They were infusing these nightshade chemicals into oils, topical ointments that you can put a small amount on your head, consecrated oil, blessed oil, infused oil on your head.
Tiny amount.
Yeah. If it's that potent, yeah. And somebody who has been practicing with these herbs for years or decades, like I would postulate that possibly Lucy Mack Smith was, could make it that potent that just a few drops on your forehead could blast you off.
Yes, Phil.
Yeah, well, it's not just 19th century. I think one of the articles in the current John Whitmer Journal is by Greg Edwards, talking about Frederick Madison Smith, who was a devotee of peyote, and he used to sit in the hot tents and so forth with the various tribes, and he felt that it gave him a much better ability to reach the kind of atonement with the spirits that, and he was trying to recommend it, but he never got very far with the RLDS.
No. Well, I wanted to talk about Fred M so much in this for the purpose of brevity. I stuck with the Nightshade family, but I believe that there's a fair amount of information that needs to be teased out of Lucian Woodworth making his trips down to Texas in 1844, Rio de Janeiro, where peyote grows, because I believe that there may have been a possibility of peyote making its presence during the very end of Joseph's life. But Fred M. Smith, notably his dissertation, The Higher Powers of Men, is a remarkable book. It was not universally liked when he published it, when he first published it. In fact, it was considered to be so what for most people. Read through a psychedelics lens and the history of psychedelics, it was about 30 years ahead of its time. And it's truly notable. And he only has a chapter on peyote, but the book itself is all about achieving ecstasy and these theophanetic and these truly ecstatic states of mind, and the various methods that people use to achieve those, including breathing exercises, including dancing, including tantric sex, including devotion and singing hymns to Jesus, including all of these various methods. And peyote was just one chapter of that, but truly a remarkable book and a fantastic introduction to this entire field of altered states of consciousness.
Any questions?
Yeah, I had a question. Big picture, we're assuming that for a young Mormon church that this is a good thing. Okay? And it sounds like a powerful influence over...
Over the what?
A powerful influence over a young church.
Yeah.
Okay? But this powerful influence, is it something coming from these plants? Is it something that only grows in the Northeast? Or does it grow every place? And if it grows just in the Northeast or every place, why is it limited to the Mormons that we know all this stuff?
Great question.
Number two, you know what I thought of when you were going over this stuff? I'm thinking of the medicine shows, during the early West, and the magic elixir that you can buy for $1.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, how far does this go?
See, that's a fantastic question, and so far outside of my pay grade. I study Mormon history, and I've only just in the past 2 years of studying and talking about and learning this, and especially learning more modern 20th century psychedelics history and the current sphere of psychedelic research. I have had a limited amount of time to expand this to how big this truly could be and how many burned over district religions might have, or there might be some explanatory power here. And also I think that there's a notable way to track the shamanistic ceremonies of the early church. The Isaac Morley Farm Church, it's a hippie commune, right? But
like it's something like from early sorcerers.
The Magi. I mean, the idea of prima materia, the idea of the elixir of life, of these chemicals that can expose the hidden worlds and expose altered states of consciousness, it's a lot, it has a lot longer of a tradition than just the 19th century, certainly. And it grows everywhere, by the way. It grows everywhere.
Barbie, did you have a question?
Oh, yeah. I just think it's a really interesting theory, and it would explain a lot about. I was just wondering. I would like to see more historical documentation that it's actually used. So, what research? So you've got two sources that maybe could show it was used. How much research have you done? What have you been able to do so far to show that it was actually used?
So this was probably ill-advised at the time, but it got a fair amount of people talking about this, which I think is the important first step. Sunstone in 2017 is when I and my co-researcher presented on this. We called it the Smith-entheogen theory, and we self-published a pamphlet about it, about 30 pages, which is available online if you search for Smith-entheogen theory. That was the first step of building on Dr. Becksted's 2007 paper, Restoration in the Sacred Mushroom. Prior to that, I'm not aware of any writings of people even teasing this idea or thinking about this idea or postulating that it might be plausible. But in that, unfortunately, what this model requires is a lot of inference and a lot of speculation, because I don't have Frederick G. Williams' ledger book that shows Joseph Smith buying 100 grams of datura plants, and then, we see an immediate correlation with an increase in spiritual experiences the next few weeks after that. I do have from Frederick G. Williams' ledger book, his biographer that wrote the 2006 biography of Frederick G. Williams. He published a fair amount of the ledger in that book, and it is notable that Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon had the highest bills of anybody else in Kirtland by an order of magnitude. But once again, that's inferential evidence, and it's kind of tough because arguably a lot of this was intentionally hid at the time.
If I just may, Bryce, add, hidden is a very good word to use because the occult is very much involved with that. And I'd just like to point out that the duality that I referred to in the Book of Mormon, and where you get to the tree of life, the fruit is bitter, but the other is sweet, and the white fruit is bitter, but the tree of life is sweet. Now, it's very significant to juxtapose this sweetness with bitterness, because when these bitter herbs were added to a wine, they would taste awful, so that they would then add other substances to make it, you alluded to this, to make it sweet, so that it would be something pleasant to drink. And so right in the Book of Mormon itself, when you decode the language, well, the one is bitter and the other is sweet, is you have there, right there, the formula for the admixture of these substances right in the Book of Mormon.
We have time for one more question.
The book Hearts Made Glad
that's one of my favorites.
Alcohol to the experience at the dedication of the Kirtland Temple.
Certainly.
But your notion sounds much better. It sounds much more appropriate because
and it could.
There are visions here, and I've never had a vision on alcohol. I've had other experiences. This is much more likely to be the basis of all of that kind of visualization and so on.
It's notable that the wine was of their own make, and it was consecrated, blessed wine. It was the shaman, Joseph Smith, who was providing the wine and telling everybody to drink as much as you want. And then chaos ensued. It's notable.
Hey, that's my department.
Thank you very much for coming to this session. Thank you very, very much.
So one last thing. If you are okay with just a minute and a half encroaching on the next activity, because I know we're not butting up against another presentation, can I tell all of you a story? Okay, it's about a minute and a half. Okay, so this morning, this is the appendix to the presentation. This is my morning in the Sacred Grove. So I was detained this morning, and I missed most of today's presentations. But as you all know, when you're a researcher, sometimes you only get small windows to conduct research. So I seized the moment, and I went to the Sacred Grove this morning. I didn't know what I would find. I just knew that I would find what I needed to. So the morning after the first rains of autumn are the absolute best time to find many species of mushroom. We argue and we bicker over the first vision being in 1820, 1822, 3, 4, whatever, but the consistency of the third week in September after the autumnal equinox is never disputed, making the perfect time to forage for all sorts of mushrooms. And all these pictures, I took them this morning. I still have mud on my pants. So as I walked through the Sacred Grove, I briefly ran into a serpent near this bench. But, you know, serpents are elusive and they're camera shy, so I couldn't snap a picture before he went sliding, hiding away into the underbrush. But I continued my search to find all sorts of wonderful specimens, not knowing what I was actually looking for or what I might find. I ran into this little guy.
He could have been a PowerPoint.
So he was a cute little guy, right? I wasn't sure what to make of this toad's presence until I saw that he was guarding some very precious little sacred plates. As we can see here, he's just blurry in the background. Now, I didn't have my spore testing kit or a microscope, so I couldn't ascertain if any of these mushrooms that I saw were indeed psychedelic mushrooms. So I resigned not to disturb the plates or their toad guardian, as I suspected he may transform into a spirit and knock me 3 or 4 rods. But I was only operating with my natural eyes, not my spiritual eyes, so I don't suppose that I was actually in any real danger. I continued going through the forest. I named the toad guardian Dioscorides. I patted him on the head, a little nudge, and thanked him for guarding his sacred treasure plates, and then I continued my quest, finding plenty more incredible specimens. I found the closest looking specimen you can see here to Liberty Caps, a psilocybin mushroom. But once again, I didn't have my field guide, I didn't have a microscope or any testing equipment, so there all of the caps remained. Also, these specimens specifically grew near fallen timber, whereas Liberty Caps usually sprout from grass, plains grass, field grass, so I was extra cautious and left them to do their own bidding. I continued my journey through the Sacred Grove, looking, not sure what I would find. I had been over there over an hour seeking, and finally I cried out, "Why can I not obtain these celestial gifts?" And then I looked into the sky in admiration of the beauty and nature around me, and I resigned that it was time to leave this sacred place. In some ways, I found what I was looking for, but what was I looking for to begin with? I couldn't answer that question, so it didn't really matter. But as I continued to walk back over the bridge to the parking lot, I saw something remarkable. Along the stream near the great and spacious parking lot, under the bridge with the wooden handrails to keep me guided along the path, lay this unsuspecting little plant. I cried out, "Where are your purple blooms? You're supposed to have beautiful purple little flowers on you," but then I realized only a mad person would yell at a plant for not being in season. These ripe little berries are the last remnants of a belladonna plant growing on the banks of a stream running through the Sacred Grove, soon to die off with the coming change of seasons just like all of us. I realized that my morning and visit to the Sacred Grove resulted in me finding exactly what I was looking for. It just so happened to be hiding in plain sight. Thank you. That does it for the update on the Smith-entheogen theory after it resting for nearly 2 years since the Sunstone presentation by Cody Nakoni and yours truly. Of course, this was merely a high-level overview of all of the data that's going into the Smith-entheogen theory book that will come out when it's finished, whenever that may be. But a paper about all of this will be coming out in the Journal of Psychedelic Studies soon, and I got some amazing feedback from this presentation that will allow me to focus and retool a working draft of another paper for submission to the John Whitmer Journal. The social science of history happens by degrees and moves at a glacial pace, but hopefully you can tell from the Q&A section that many people are looking forward to academic journal papers and the book on this relatively provocative subject. The immediate feedback was great. Everybody in attendance was super engaged, and after the presentation, Brian and I were surrounded by a gang of folks with dozens of questions. The resounding conclusion of everybody who talked to me afterwards and, during the Q&A and after the actual presentation block itself for the rest of the conference was get this research out there because they want to see it in a journal. So here's a small anecdote for all of the listeners. Dan Vogel attended the presentation, which made me very happy to see. For those of you who don't know the name, Dan Vogel is one of the current foremost scholars on Joseph Smith. I read from his source and text critical edition of the history of the church nearly every episode, and few people have done more to shed light on the life of Joseph Smith through original documents than Dan Vogel has. Notably, Dan is quite skeptical of the Smith-entheogen theory and of my work in general because he doesn't think Mormon history is a story to be told so much as a rigorous academic battlefield on which he has been a general for over 3 decades. It's fun, though, because he's so incredibly skeptical, but I believe he has kind of a morbid fascination with the Smith-entheogen theory, even if he doesn't believe that there's much merit to it. His feedback to me after the presentation was that I'm a good presenter, but he wishes that I picked a different subject, which, of course made me laugh. You see, Vogel is a fierce academic, and my presentations walk the fine lines of academic mixed with entertainment, which I believe he thinks degrades the sanctity of the field. My overall point in telling about Dan here is that I'm very excited for the future of publishing on the Smith-entheogen theory because I have reason to believe that Dan, as a fellow atheist, may be one of the harshest critics. Good. I welcome criticism because so far the only criticism on the theory in general that I've received is that I haven't published it in an academic journal yet. The podcast, publishing it here is awesome. A self-published pamphlet, that's cool. But none of these are actually academic journals. I need somebody like Dan to take the theory seriously and contend with it critically so that the theory can truly experience the rigor of the academic field necessary to cull away the weak evidence and spotlight the strong. I also quipped to him that, hey, Dan, if you just tried psychedelics once, it might change your mind. He laughed. Whether that was at the remark or that was at me, I really couldn't tell. But one of the people who asked a question during the Q&A was Barbara Jones Brown, the executive director of the Mormon History Association, a well-renowned historian, a BYU and U of U journalism and historian graduate, respectively, and a believing historian who's worked with Rick Turley and many other official historians for the church on various subjects within Mormon history. She and I had a wonderful conversation after the presentation, and she gave me some fantastic ideas to help substantiate the theory. Now, I'm excited to tell all of you about that, but that's only going to patrons of the show over at patreon.com/nakedmormonism as my way of saying thank you for providing the resources necessary to research and present this information. Patrons will also get a story about a super secret special history tour that I attended during the conference. What can I say? Knowing the right historians certainly has its perks. It's been a while since we've gone through our newest pledges over at patreon.com/nakedmormonism, but we got to do it here. A lot of people answered the call. So let's begin. Thank you so much to Paul, to Ryan, Peggy, Tay, Alexa, Tug Ricks, Tug is just a funny name. I don't know why. Roy, who I attended John Whitmer with and met him as well as his son. It was a pleasure to spend time with you, Roy. To Craig, Aaron, Michelle, David, Ryan, Rocky, Jessica Audbeer, who we answered a question from many episodes ago, and Mindy. We also had pledge edits from George, Mark, Marie, Devin, Walker, Aaron, and Stephanie. So to all of our new patrons, as well as all of the pledge edits, thank you so very much. That puts us at a total of 21 extra bucks per episode and puts us so very near the 200 total patrons mark. I can nearly taste it. So if you want to join the ranks of all of these people, get an extremely extended edition of this episode, nearly twice the length of the standard presentation with all of the extra information that I had collected for the presentation, be sure to head on over to patreon.com/nakedmormonism, where you can pledge as little as $1 an episode to help fund the research that goes into this show and gain access to all of the extra content. Most extra content that we're getting right now is reading through the NAMO Book Club of Mormonism Unveiled. Arguably the most important and influential quote-unquote anti-Mormon book ever published. The first one, definitely published in 1834. Mormonism Unveiled is the book that we're reading through on the NAMO Patreon exclusive feed as part of the NAMO Book Club, just for those who support the show. So to wrap up today, I just want to say that the John Whitmer Historical Association is a truly remarkable conference. The caliber of historians and scholars who comprise the majority of attendees makes it an amazing academic experience, and the presentations are fascinating. Here are just a few of the sessions during this year's conference that you missed if you didn't attend. We have Frederick Douglass and Joseph Smith III, a memoir revisited, presented by Kevin W. Bryant. We have Joseph Smith's Courting, Plural Marriage in Nauvoo, presented by Susan Staker. We have The Art of Polygamy, presented by Kelly McAfee. The Spirit Like a Fire, A World for Joseph Smith, presented by Rick Grunder. And The Family That Built Canals, presented by my personal friend and moderator of the presentation you just listened to, Vicky Speak. That's just a small handful of the amazing presentations. This is the absolute cutting edge of Mormon history research. And if you wonder where I get my history from to bring to the show, it's from the articles, books, and presentations provided by this body of unequaled historians and scholars. These people provide the foundation for the narrative that you listen to every week on the show, and I am forever indebted to all of them for their tireless efforts and decades of constant, unwavering research. Next year, in late September, John Whitmer Historical Conference will be in St. George, Utah. I see the download numbers, and I know a lot of you listeners live in Utah, and probably some of you even live in St. George. I implore you to consider attending JWHA in next year, or at least keep the possibility of attending in the back of your mind. If you listen to this show, you have enough of a historical foundation of Mormonism to understand the presentations in proper historical context and why each session is important. You'll likely meet some of the historians whose work I frequently cite on this podcast. Maybe you'll bring your copy of their books with you to get autographs, or you'll buy a copy of one of their books from the book retailers there to have the author sign. JWHA is a great gathering of the greatest minds in Mormon history, and it's completely unbounded by the correlated Brighamite narrative most of us were taught beginning in our early childhoods. Hey, maybe I'll see you there next year. Thank you so much for tuning in and lending me your ear. Hope to talk to you next time here on the Naked Mormonism Podcast. This podcast is produced with help of Julie Briscoe as social media manager, Brian Ziegenhagen as audio engineer, and Andrew Torres of the Law Offices of P. Andrew Torres in the Opening Arguments podcast as legal counsel. Music is written and performed by Jason Camo of aloststateofmind.com and used with permission. Naked Mormonism is a production of Ground Gnomes LLC, copyright 2019, all rights reserved.